Hi there, my name is Vic V. I'm the head of the ENT Sleep Surgery Department at the Royal National ENT Hospital. And what I want to do today is tell you all about the Inspire Hypoglossal Nerve Implant for obstructive sleep apnea. Obstructive sleep apnea is when you can't breathe properly at night and you stop breathing, and it causes problems such as weight gain, high blood pressure, heart attacks, strokes, things like that. And the idea is that this device, which is an implant, helps you with that problem. Now, the way it works is that some people with obstructive sleep apnea, so they're snoring, they're sleeping at night, their tongue can roll back and block off their breathing. So if you're on your side like this, your jaw falls back a little bit, your tongue rolls back. And because of that, the tongue falls back and blocks your breathing, so you can't breathe behind it. Now, what this device does is that it stimulates the nerve that goes to your tongue. And that nerve is called the hypoglossal nerve. It comes round like this and goes underneath your tongue like this. Hypo means underneath, and glossal means tongue in Latin or something. And what this does is that this sits in your chest. So it's implanted. So it's a surgical operation. It's an incision just across here, across your right second, just above your second rib space, just about here. So this is implanted in here, and there's a wire that goes from here. You can see that there's a little port here, and I'll put a little video here about it with a bit closer up. So there's a little port here that goes from a wire over your collarbone up into your neck and twizzles round that nerve, the hypoglossal nerve. It has to be put in a certain position on the nerve because what it does is those nerves pull the tongue forward. So back to my little diagram I had before, the tongue's falling back like this. You can't breathe. You have obstructive sleep apnea. This pacemaker type device pulls the tongue forward by exciting the nerve that goes to your tongue. So the tongue gets pulled forward so you can breathe behind it. Now, the way it works out when to do this, you don't want your tongue being pulled forward every minute of the day, is that you use this sort of remote control at night. So you put this on at night, you turn it on, and then you turn it off in the morning. It also synchronizes with your breathing, which is why this implant is placed just underneath the skin here. And there's another wire. There's actually two little spots here. Again, I'll show you on this video here. There's another wire that goes not up into your neck to the nerve, but there's another wire that goes to the just between the ribs. So it senses when you are breathing. When you breathe, it senses this, and then it synchronizes that to your tongue. So to synchronize when your tongue gets moved forward and then when it relaxes again afterwards. Now, although this technology is relatively new to the UK, it has been done about 90,000 times around the world. So 90,000 other implants have been done around the world, particularly in America and Germany and other places with all the money. But we have free healthcare here. So it's taken me since 2018, 2019 to drag the UK into actually giving these implants out. They're about sort of £30,000 or so to implant into your chest, and this device costs 20 something thousand pounds. So it's pretty expensive, this thing. So it's taken us in the UK a little bit of time to provide this for free for all patients who come to see us with obstructive sleep apnea. There is some eligibility criteria, meaning that not everyone who snores and has obstructive sleep apnea can get one of these things. So you need to be below a certain weight. And I talk about eligibility criteria in another video, but roughly you should be below 35, a BMI of 35. At the Royal National, we aim for 32 to 30, and I'll discuss that perhaps in another video. And I'll talk about the research about that as well. We also say that your sleep apnea has to be relatively severe, so between 15 and 65. They don't like us going over that, but I understand in the US they're allowing up to about 100, I think, soon. So I think with time we'll catch up with the Americans. So if your sleep apnea is moderate to very severe, 65, and if you don't know what AHI is, I should have mentioned that. AHI is the number of times that you stop breathing every hour on average during sleep. So if you're stopping breathing 30 times an hour, that's considered severe, means that you're stopping breathing once every 2 minutes. So it's enough to stop your breathing, the oxygen levels to drop a little bit. You have to take a breath and you start again, which is why it puts strain on your heart and your lungs and causes all sorts of other problems like weight gain and strokes and things like that. So This is for moderate to severe people. It also happens to be useful only, well, it's only eligible for people who have tried a CPAP mask and either don't get on with it, don't want to use it anymore, or just physically just can't use it at all. We also in this country say that you should have at least tried or considered a mandibular advancement device, which is a gum shield that brings your jaw forward. That's quite useful in these situations because it's typically the tongue that needs to be pulled forward. If you pull the jaw forward, it pulls the tongue forward with it. And that way, this is what this implant does: is pull the tongue forward without pulling your jaw forward. Because I guess there are problems with mandibular advancement devices. It can hurt this sort of joint here, the temporomandibular joint. So you can get TMJ dysfunction, we call it, and some tooth loosening. And if you don't have teeth, or some other problem, you can't have a mandibular advancement device. So if you meet all those criteria, you're eligible for one of these on the NHS. So you can come to see us at the Royal National ENT Hospital on the NHS, or you can see some of the other centres opening up in the UK. I'm really proud that the UK has finally stepped up a little bit to start providing these implants to everyone. Now, the only other eligibility criteria that you need to be aware of is that you need to make sure that it's actually your tongue that's causing the problem. It can't be a lateral wall problem, or you can't have big tonsils or something like that. Because if you've got big tonsils, just remove the tonsils. And as the national guidelines say, if you've got big tonsils or a really blocked up nose or something like that, you should get that sorted out first rather than having a CPAP device in the first place. So that's another video, and I've actually done a video on that as well. So make sure that you have a tongue-based problem rather than any other cause. And the way to do that is to see someone who does a drug-induced sleep endoscopy. A drug-induced sleep endoscopy is a way that doctors use to find out not how bad you are, because that's a sleep study. We send you home with a bit of kit, you wear it at night and find out, oh, you stop breathing 30 times an hour, 60 times an hour, whatever. But a drug-induced sleep endoscopy is when we work out why you have the problem, not how bad you are, but why you have the problem. So what we do is we lie you down on the bed, give you some sedation through the arm so that you fall asleep, start snoring away in front of us, and then we use a telescope down the back of your throat and videotape the inside of your throat whilst you're snoring, whilst you have sleep apnea. And whilst that's happening, we can see what's going on. We can see the bits of tissue that are fluttering around and go, that's where the noise has been generated from. And we can see the areas of your throat which are collapsing in. So we can say, that's why you have sleep apnea. And if predominantly your problem is your tongue that's falling back and blocking your breathing, rather than the lateral wall or some other problem, then we can say, yes, then this implant would work quite well in you, assuming that you fit all the other eligibility criteria as well. Now, the next thing I want to tell you about is how this is implanted. It has changed a little bit over time, but recently it requires two incisions, two 5 centimeter incisions. One is just about here across the chest, and that's to implant this part of the implant. It sits like that in your chest. One lead goes in between some of the very small muscles of your rib cage, so it can sense when you're breathing, which is what I mentioned at the start of the video. There is then another wire that goes up here, over the top of your collarbone, up along the neck here, all underneath the skin, so you don't really see it. And as I said before, twizzles round your hypoglossal nerve. So there has to be another incision here as well, another 5 centimeter incision just there. Typically, we do it on the right hand side because most surgeons are right-handed. But if you need to do it on the left-hand side, then we can do it that way around. So going back to the incision on your chest, this implant actually sits right on top of your pectoralis major muscle, the big pec muscle that's sitting there. And most of us mortals have some fat layer, some skin, some other sort of layers there. So with something so thin, you can't often see it. I haven't, well, we've only done a few compared to the Americans who've done 90,000, but we can't see it in our patients. But you can feel it, and you can feel the cord going up your neck as well. Over here, there is another incision here, and that's typically quite easy to hide with some good stitching. And I use dissolvable stitching and some glue and things like that. But it's quite easy to get rid of a scar in that area, so you don't often see it very easily. You have to also remember that this is a battery. So this lasts for about 10 years. So in 10 years' time, when it helps your obstructive sleep apnea, you say, look, it's running out of battery. Can I have another one? So we have to make an incision here again through the same scar, remove this one and put a new one in. It typically apparently takes about I guess, about half an hour or so. So it's not particularly difficult, but it's something that needs to be done in 10 years. So you will need an operation every 10 years to replace this battery. So in this part of the video, I want to tell you about the evidence that this device actually works. Now, I guess a lot of people will be looking at this section and going, oh my God, this is going to be a bit boring with all the stats and the medical literature and things like that. So I'll give you a brief summary. Yes, it does work. It's about a 70% reduction in your breathing problems, in your sleep apnea problems. And most people seem to use it long term with not many compliance problems. Because as you know, people with obstructive sleep apnea and use CPAP, they find it quite difficult to use. Whereas a lot of people use these implants and seem to get on with it relatively well. In terms of risks and side effects, it's quite low, lower than most implants actually. So you're looking at, in terms of serious problems, about 1% of people have problems. But as you can probably appreciate, those are headlines and there's a lot of detail in there, a lot of nuance in the numbers there. So I'm going to go through the papers one by one, and hopefully, if those of you who are interested in the geeky side of this will want to know, will be interested in this sort of level of data. So no discussion about the Inspire device is really complete without talking about the first paper that came out talking about hypoglossal nerve implants. And that was the paper in 2014 by Strollo. I'm not sure if I said that name right. I'm sorry, Mr. Strollo, if you're out there, Dr. Strollo. Um, so this is a cohort of people that they implanted in, I think, America, in a multi-center cohort. So all this group of people, 126 people, were brought together, and they were told, look, have this implant, let's see how it works over a year. And that was the first part of the study. Now, at the start, they found 929 people, and they looked at them carefully and said, look, actually, you don't meet this criteria, you don't meet this criteria. So only 126 were found to be what they felt perfect for this device at the start. So you can see that, like I said before, not everyone gets this implant. It's the people who it would work best for. So before implantation, before the implant was put in, they found that the median AHI was 29.3, and that went down to 9 after implantation. So that seemed to work quite well. It's gone from almost severe, so moderate to severe, down to mild. That's a great improvement. We typically say if you look at total sleep time with CPAP, we roughly say that it's about 11.9. With CPAP, you bring people down. Now, a lot of people go, it's not 11.9. My machine tells me that I'm down to 0.4 or 1 AHI out of what I previously had, which was 60. That's true. Whilst you're wearing the CPAP device, there's a normal reduction down to very low numbers. But I said total sleep time. So that means a lot of people, when they use CPAP, use it for 4 hours a night, 70% of the time. So that equates to about 2.9 hours per night. Now, there has been some studies, I think it was Stark in Germany, who wrote a paper that showed that if you look at the total sleep time, so you put an actual sleep study on for the whole night, and showed that actually a lot of people wear CPAP for a few hours, and then in the morning they rip it off and they go to bed again. And so they have a bit of sleep apnea for those extra hours they slept without the CPAP. So if you average out the whole total night's sleep, on average, we expect about an AHI of about 11.9, 11.8 or something like that. And so bringing it down to 9 after implantation is a good success, particularly as most people seem to use it through the whole night. They don't turn it off in the middle of the night and then go back to sleep. So one measure of success with surgical treatments is to say, well, we know that CPAP on average brings people down to 11.9, 11.8 if they're good users of CPAP. So if you can get below that, you're doing as well, if not better, than CPAP. There is another measure for surgical success called the shear criteria, which means that you're bringing the AHI, that number that you started off with, below 20, and you're also halving the AHI. So say you had an AHI of 60 and you brought it down to 30. Yes, you've succeeded to halve the AHI, but you're not below 20. So that's not a success according to the shear criteria. If, however, you brought them from 40 down to 19, yes, you have succeeded in that situation. If you brought them down from 40 down to 0.1, that's perfect. Yes, it's still a tick on the shear criteria. So the shear criteria success rate with the Strollo initial STAR trial, it was called, brought down 66% of people said yes, tick, they met the shear criteria. So you can see that although it improved a lot of people, improved it by 70%, some people probably didn't still become lower than 20. And typically we say that if your AHI doesn't come below 15 or 13 or so, 12 if you're still tired, if your AHI isn't below 15, you still need to use a CPAP or some other device to help you. So that will give you a little bit of understanding of how well it works in that initial trial that we had. Now, some people say of CPAP that actually, yes, it is improving my AHI, whatever that number is, but I still don't really like it. I'm still feeling tired in the days, and it doesn't really improve my quality of life because I'm having to lug this thing around on my travel trips and things like that. So, when they looked at the quality of life improvement, there was a significant improvement in their quality of life. And apparently, a greater than 2 points on that quality of life scale would say, yes, it was significant. It went to 2.9 using the Inspire device. The other thing that we look at is tiredness. So we use something, although I don't particularly like the scale, it's called the Epworth scale, and it's out of about 24, 25. And a lot of people, on average with the Epworth scale before this trial, before the implantation, had an Epworth score of 11. And that anything over 8 is particularly, quite tired. And after the implantation, they brought their tiredness levels to about 7, which officially is within the normal range. Now, that study was done back in 2014. It was the first study done on this implant, but there have been obviously lots of studies, 90,000 of these implants put in around the world. And so there is a newer, well, there's lots of new papers out. The one which I found, which was done more recently, was called a meta analysis. It draws together all the implants together, all the papers about implants together. And they looked at 44 different studies totaling about 8,670 patients with this implant. And they found that people who had used the implant for longer than a year, they looked at their AHI and they found that the number of people that brought their AHI down to less than 5, so officially cured from their obstructive sleep apnea, was 47%. So there's an almost 50% chance of being completely cured with this device if you have an Inspire device and if you meet all the eligibility criteria. Now, the number of people that were brought down to less than 10 on their AHI, so better than you would expect CPAP to be helpful for, was approximately 72%. So 72% of people got a result which was slightly better or better than CPAP. And in this study, 82% of people brought their AHI down to less than 15. So that would be a result to the point where you no longer need to use your CPAP. I quite like using those numbers because it's a bit more, it fits into the real world a little bit more rather than using, how much your AHI is reduced by or the shear criteria, which I don't really like. But if you set sort of hard limits, how many people got below this level, how many people got below this level, that I think is quite useful. Now, with any procedure, there are risks associated with it. And luckily, in America, they have something known as the MORD database or something like that. And this database is where doctors in America send over all the problems they've had with the implant and they need to document it and tell everyone. So I'm not sure how many exactly have been done in America, but several thousand. I said 90,000 around the world, and most of them I think have been done in America. So 1,178 reports have been sent over to this database. And what this team at Maud have done is collated all of those implants and worked at what sort of side effects and problems and risks there are with this implant. What I'm going to do is, because there's quite a lot there, I'm going to put all of these risks and complications in this area here. The first lot are about the actual operation itself. So if you make a cut here or a cut here, obviously there's going to be a chance of bleeding, a chance of infection. There's some pain associated with the actual operation, some swelling in that area as well. Also, with this area here particularly, there are two nerves you have to worry about. One is the hypoglossal nerve. And if you accidentally damage the hypoglossal nerve, you can get some tongue weakness. Now, on the whole, as you can see from these lists over here, it seems to cause a transient problem, so a short-term problem with weakness on the side of the tongue. It's very, very rare for it to cause a complete damage to the nerve so it doesn't work anymore. The other one is that there's a nerve that comes along here and up into your mouth just about here. That's called the marginal-mandibular nerve, and it helps you doing this sort of movement or smiling like this. If you were to damage that, your mouth can drop down like that. An awful lot of people so up to about 18% of people have some sort of weakness of that nerve in the first week or so, 2 weeks after this operation, because it's sort of been pushed out the way when you do it. So it's a bit like sleeping on your arm, and it takes a bit of time for the arm to come back and working again afterwards. But after a while, that seems to work as well. There is a gland in that area there, sort of called the submandibular gland, and you can get problems with that. You can get some swelling and blood collecting in that area. So there are lots of things that can happen, but fortunately, they're quite rare. The other thing is in the chest. Remember, there's a lead that goes to the lung, and there's a chance of accidentally damaging the lung and the lung sort of deflating. That's again very rare, but something that people should know about. And there's a list there about that. There are also problems with the actual device itself. And I think over time, over the last 10 years or so, the device has been improved and there are different versions out. So I think a lot of these problems have been, well, they've been tried to be dealt with by the company by making their device better. So we have new generation of devices out at the moment. So hopefully a lot of these problems have got better, but there's a chance of this thing migrating around and needs to be repositioned back where it should have started. There's problems with feeling it. And some people, particularly with, we know there's some cardiac pacemakers, that ones that help your heart, people sort of mess around with them, and it's called, I think, twiddler syndrome, and you might see it on that list here. So there's all sorts of things that could go wrong, but fortunately they're incredibly rare. And remember, say about 90,000, but only about 1,000 of these have actually gone to report for the, I think it's the FDA, organized this database. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the side effects and risks at the moment, purely because I'm going to do another video about another implant called the Genio implant. And then I'm going to do a third video comparing the Genio and the Inspire. And that's where some of the risks and complications and things can come out there as well. Because, for example, there's a wire that goes over your collarbone. So there's a slightly higher risk of causing damage because it's sitting almost just on a bone. And so you could actually damage it here or get it caught up in a fracture or something like that. And it's quite a long wire. And so, I'll talk about all of that in that third video. If you're worried about the research, there's plenty of it. There's loads of research out there. And it looks like if you were to compare it to other relatively big operations, say some people talk about a double jaw surgery or MMA surgery, bringing the jaw forward. On average, it looks like that this implant, which works roughly on the same population of people as people who bring their jaw forward and they basically fracture the bones here and here and bring the whole face forward a little bit, that pulls the tongue forward, same way as the implant does, but just pulls the tongue forward. It seems to suggest that there's a better outcome with these implants compared to people who have this double jaw surgery. The other thing to mention is that when the implant goes in, you're not suddenly cured. It often takes 6 weeks up to 2 months for everything to bed in before you actually were allowed to turn on the device. We want it to heal up in that position and then work. But sometimes it can heal a bit too much. So you have to make sure that you stretch your neck and stuff like this. Make sure it doesn't get tethered in that area. And you can get that, but as long as you keep rolling your neck around, looking up and down, I've done a video on this, what you should do afterwards. And looking after the scar, make sure you don't go into bright sunlight and get a sunburn in that area. After a while, you can just sort of massage the scar to stop it from becoming a constricted sort of white line, and it softens up the scar a little bit as well, and across your chest. But don't do the twiddler syndrome thing where you start moving around the wire and messing around with it. Look, I'm going to go on to the next video now, but thank you very much for watching this. I'll talk about the Nixua Genio implant in my next video. Take care. Bye-bye.